This is the I Hate Football podcast. I am your host, Q. Appreciate you joining me once again. And, sometimes, I, like some of you guys out there, will say certain things. Football will make us feel certain things. And for my part, one of the things I say often is I hate football. It definitely is stress inducing. Sometimes it is anger inducing, and a lot of times it is joyful and makes you feel great, right? When your team does what you want them to do, what you expect them to do. And then there's a fan base like the University of Miami that this week uh, got some good news from the number one player in the country, right? So definitely a fan base that is loving themselves some offseason football to this point. And landing the number one player in the country will do that for you, right? It's been about a week now, and just wanted to talk a little bit about what that commitment meant, kind of across the country, and really what people were saying as a result of him committing to the University of Miami, and people's outrage, just kind of really confirms, two things, right? Possibly three, right? The first thing, being Jackson Cantwell is the real deal. When you look at what his Final Four list looked like, you had some major players, right? Some big time teams. I think the second thing, that it confirms, and I think it reconfirms, right? Because I think a lot of people, for some reason, just kind of forgot that Mario Cristobal is one of the best recruiters in the country. I think it's really it's kind of super simple, right? And when you're looking at every time I see a player commit, right? No matter who it is, right? Especially your major players, I always look at three things, right? Where they're from. I look at first of all, you look at the player. I'm sorry, you look at the player first and foremost, right? What kind of player are you getting, right? 3, 4, 5 star. Where they're from. The second thing I look at, and then what their commitment list was like. Who did you have to beat out in order to land this player? Right. And so, you start with the fact that Jackson Cantwell, was kind of across the board the number one player in the country. Right. He plays a premium position, which is left tackle. Right. And, he is a kid that when you look at, the measurables, right, he's got all the measurables that you want. Right. A guy who plays left tackle currently, at his high school, a kid who is, depending on which website you follow, 6'7" or 6'8", kid who's about 310 pounds. Someone that, you look at and, is only 16 years old, which is pretty impressive, that a kid, that looks like that, still has room to grow, right, given his age. You look at the fact that he is extremely strong for his age, right? He bench presses 500 pounds. I think it's like 5'10", 5'15". Last I saw, he close grip bench presses about 475, which again, very impressive, especially when you have, long arms like he does, and the whole deal where you're looking at putting up, over 500 pounds. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. But again, at 16 years old, is able to do so. A guy who has plus athleticism, a guy who is a star off the football field and in track and field also, where he is the best shot putter in the country. And has broken numerous high school records and everything, following in his parents' footsteps. Both of his parents, were track and field stars in the Olympics, and his dad being a shot putter as well. So definitely the genetics are there for sure. And then you look at, a kid that off the field, just a really likable kid, right? A kid who is, he's well spoken, he's educated, really does talk like an adult. I've seen several of his interviews, kind of leading up to his commitment, some interviews, post commitment, and I've always left just really impressed by the kid. Just again, makes good points. He's somebody who, he's thoughtful. Yes sir, no ma'am, type of player. I mean, type of person, right? You can tell he's been raised the right way, has had good influences in his life, and just somebody who, as a program, whoever landed him, right? You'd have to feel really lucky to do so. And it just so happened that it was, University of Miami. And, to me, the uproar, behind, the commitment was really interesting to me, right? And I call it an uproar because there was a lot of fan bases who immediately, they how could he go to Miami? Has he seen what Miami has been? Again, his other three schools that made up his Final Four were Ohio State, Oregon, and Georgia. Right, Georgia coming in at number 2 by all accounts. And so you're looking at this commitment to a head coach that I think a lot of people have forgotten what kind of recruiter he is. Right, you look at his history with the University of Miami, right? But even beforehand, right? He was the head coach at Oregon. In 2018, landed the 13th ranked class in the country. Right, when you're looking at 2019, he had the 8th ranked class in the country. In 2020, he had the 14th ranked class in the country. And in 2021, he had the 7th ranked class in the country. Not only did he have a top 10 class, landing at number 7, but he also landed 7 number 1 players. I'm sorry, he landed number 1 players from 7 different states. Right? So, again, that's not nothing. Right? You landed the top player from 7 different states. So what are we talking about here? We're really still questioning Mario Cristobal as a recruiter. Now we fast forward to Miami, right? He got there in 2022. He had the 13th ranked class. In 23, he had the 8th ranked class. 24, he had the 6th ranked class. And in this most recent class in 2025, he finished 13th. And we're still questioning Mario Cristobal. Does anybody remember when NIL came into play? NIL was officially approved in July of 2021. Okay. You go back to his days at Alabama, where he was, he was at Alabama from 2013 to 2016, right? And at Alabama in 2015, he was a recruiter of the year. You talk about a staff that had, obviously Nick Saban as head coach, but had Lane Kiffin as the OC, right? Had Billy Napier, who's now, the head coach at Florida, as a wide receivers coach. Mike Locksley was part of that staff also. Was a head coach, he's been the head coach at Maryland, was a head coach at New Mexico, I believe. So among that staff, he was the best recruiter of the bunch, right? Again, recruiter of the year in 2015, right? So when you look at what it is that he landed at in his time, right, at Alabama, you're looking at some offensive linemen he recruited and landed who became first and second rounders, right? 5-star Cam Robinson, 5-star Jonah Williams, 5-star Alex Leatherwood, 4-star Ryan Kelly. We all know, before that at Oregon, Penei Sewell, who wasn't a 5-star kid, but obviously a highly recruited kid, a 4-star kid who they developed, and now he's he was drafted, I believe 7th overall, and he's now the best right tackle in the NFL, highest paid right tackle in the NFL, right? You look at who else are we looking at here? Justin Herbert, Kayvon Thibodeau, who was taken in the first round, number 5 overall, and so, you're looking at that, and I still wonder again, where is this a surprise? Where is this uproar, about Miami having landed, a kid like Jackson Cantwell, right? This is just part of a continued effort of the University of Miami, looking to the Midwest to recruit, and they've landed some guys, some big time kids, in the Midwest here in the last couple of signing classes. You look back, in 2024, defensive tackle Justin Scott, 5-star kid who they flipped from Ohio State. You look at a kid like Marquise Lightfoot, who came from Chicago. Some services had him as a 5-star. A kid he had committed, obviously still on the roster. Elias Rudolph, 4-star defensive end from Ohio. You're looking at 2025, landed 2 tight ends from the Midwest, right? Brock Schott, 4-star tight end from Indiana. Luca Gilbert, 4-star tight end from Ohio, and now you fast forward kind of here to the 26th class. Not only do you have Jackson Cantwell committed, but you also have Ben Congdon committed, who is 6'7", about 290, a kid from Ohio. So, when you look around the country and you look at the players coming from that area and where they're going to school, you're looking at how successful these schools are, right? Notre Dame, the majority of their guys on the offensive line are from the Midwest. Ohio State, same thing. Iowa, who always produces top offensive linemen, right? Recruits heavy in the Midwest, right? And so on and so forth. Obviously, across the Big Ten, you're getting, really, really good, top offensive linemen going, high in the draft. So Mario Cristobal has established that area as an area he wants to create a foothold, and he has been able to accomplish that the last couple of recruiting cycles. So there again, right? How are we not giving this guy credit? How are we still surprised that Mario Cristobal is recruiting these types of guys when that's been his history, right? He's done it at Alabama, he's done it at Oregon, he's doing it now at Miami, right? So again, I think the uproar needs to end, right? The surprising nature of the rival fan bases, is kind of comical to me, honestly, and it needs to end. I still don't understand it. Right. And I'm sure probably where it comes from, and it's really low hanging fruit. We're looking at what previous, seasons here at Miami have been like since he's been here. And I get that. I understand the money that he got. I understand that the $8.5 million a year that he gets are indicative of what the expectations are at Miami, right? Previous history in terms of titles, right? And now money being allocated to Mario Cristobal are indications that the school and the fan base expects to be better than 5-7 his first year, right? They expect to be better than 7-5 in 2024, right? But we fast forward a little bit and we look at 2025. And we look at 25. I'm sorry, we look at this past year. He was 5-7 his first year, 7-5 his second year, and now you fast forward to last year where he won 10 games, right, with the number 1 pick in the draft, and that inherently raises the profile of your program, right? And guys, let's not pretend that this is uncharted territory for the University of Miami. I understand what they've been for the better part of 20 years. But let's not pretend that this program hasn't seen success, because I think we'd be looking through, I think we'd be kidding ourselves, and we'd be making a mistake. There is a delusional section of every fan base, and I don't pretend that the University of Miami doesn't have that section of the fan base that is delusional, right? That thinks that the program should win every single year, that they should land every single recruit from South Florida, that the roster should be full of 5 stars. I understand that, and I've heard that. I get it, and it's not realistic, right? The landscape of college football has changed from when the University of Miami dominated. But you look at what they're doing now, right? Coming off a 10-win season, coming off a season in which they had the number 1 pick in the draft, right? And let's look a little bit further than that, and what it is that a school like the University of Georgia didn't do this past year. And by no means am I being delusional or am I being crazy to compare those two schools in terms of recent success. I understand what recent success has looked like at Georgia. I understand they won back-to-back titles here recently. I understand they signed, top 3 classes, every year since Kirby Smart, has become head coach. I understand that. Totally get that. But last year showed that they are not on offense what they have been previously, right? Under a guy like Todd Monken at OC, right? I don't think you're carrying over the same success with Mike Bobo at OC and Stacy Searles as your offensive line coach that you had previously, right? And I think the numbers show that, right? Last year, when you're looking at what they were in terms of running the ball, right? I think they were 102nd in the country at running the ball, right? Not good when you consider what it is they've recruited at that position at O-line, what it is they have in the running back room. It kind of makes you wonder, right? And when you have talent like they did last year, like they do every year, right, and depth, well, what comes after that, right? You have to look at the coaching, and you have to wonder, okay, well, what are we doing with all this talent? Clearly not using it, to their potential, all right? And so you have to now fast forward to what it is, that the University of Miami did last year. And granted, I know that Georgia won the SEC, and I know that Georgia didn't make the playoff, or I'm sorry, that Miami didn't make the playoff. But as an offensive lineman, you're looking at what Miami is doing, right? They're bringing back maybe the best offensive line in the country, right? As a consensus, a top 5 offensive line in the country, right? And given their performance last year, right, where they had the number 1 offense in the country, right, a really strong running game there. I think they were top 5 in yards per carry, right? They had a couple guys, that left and were drafted. You're bringing back a lot of talent, and so you have to look at what it is they're doing now, under Coach Mario Cristobal, under offensive line coach Alex Mirabal, and you really have to be excited as an offensive lineman, right? You're going to have Carson Beck coming in this year as a transfer. They've got some nice guys committed, for the future. But you have to look at the way they're running the ball, the way they're recruiting, and if you're Jackson Cantwell, the relationships that you've built with your position coach, your head coach, and you follow that and you commit. Like, why the uproar? I've seen a lot of stuff saying, "Oh, it was the money, it was the money, it was the money," but he came out, on an interview and said that himself. He said it because I heard it with my own 2 ears, and he said that the money was going to be good across the board. The money was not the issue because he was going to get paid regardless. And it's up to everybody to believe or not whatever numbers you've heard thrown out, by On3. And I still don't understand how it is that they come up with these NIL evaluations, right? I don't get it, but it really does seem like Miami is the only program that consistently, people speculate about, what it is that Carson Beck and Jackson Cantwell and all these guys are getting paid, and these numbers come out. And I'm not calling myself an insider by any stretch. I have a good friend of mine who has a connection inside the University of Miami athletic department, and he's told me, when all the numbers were coming out, about Carson Beck, that the numbers weren't anywhere near what people were saying, right? And so, again, I don't understand where these numbers are coming from. I think they're very arbitrary, but they get put out by On3 with what background, what knowledge, I have no idea. I've only seen 2 programs since NIL started that have officially come out, and they've actually put out official numbers of what guys were getting paid. University of Tennessee did it with Nico Iamaleava. When he committed, he signed for 3 years, $8 million. Just recently, and maybe this didn't make news because of the school and the player who wasn't, super well known unless you follow college football very closely. But Darian Mensah transferred from Tulane to Duke, and Duke put out the numbers, and the numbers that they paid Mensah were 2 years, $8 million, which a little bit surprising given the player and the school, but they gave him the money that they thought was appropriate. But outside of those 2, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember schools really putting out those numbers, right? Making those numbers public and taking credit for whatever NIL deal, these guys were getting. I think everybody speculates, but I'm still always very surprised at how On3 comes out with these NIL valuations and everything like that. So, again, this isn't the same old Miami, right? And I get that the recent performances in terms of record haven't been what people have expected from them. But I think this is a program that when you look at it, I'd say you have to probably have to admit it's a program that's on the rise. I think it's a program that is recruiting differently. It is developing, right? When Mario Cristobal landed the job at Miami. The year he landed the head coaching gig, one player got drafted, right? And when you look at this most recent draft, not only did you have the number one player overall, but you had, I think, 7 guys drafted. You had, another 3 or 4, really show well at rookie mini camps with a strong chance to make their respective teams. You look at Xavier Restrepo in Tennessee. You look at Jacoby George in Carolina. Excuse me. So I think it is a program that is building towards sustainable success. When you look at what Mario Cristobal is doing, he's overhauled the coaching staff. He's made some hires that probably weren't the best hires looking back on it, but he hasn't it hasn't kept him from admitting that mistake, making the necessary changes, and seeing improvement. Right? He did that on the offensive side of the ball when he first hired Josh Gaddis. Obviously, that was a disaster. And, then went and hired Brett Lashley. That was a huge success. He went on to become the head coach at SMU. Obviously now has, a great coordinator in Shannon Dawson, who has helped, even Tyler Van Dyke and how great he wasn't. But, the numbers, if you look at them closely, it was an offense that was putting up numbers. Just Tyler Van Dyke, just wasn't able to not turn the ball over. All right. And now you look at, what he did with Cam Ward, that offense as a whole, obviously producing the number one pick, the number one offense in the country. So, again, let's give credit where credit is due. I don't think, not landing Jackson Cantwell is going to keep Georgia from landing, the possibly the number one class in the country, no worse than the top 3. They're in it for a lot of huge guys like they always are. Same for Ohio State, and so again, let's not pretend like Mario Cristobal, isn't an ace recruiter, right? For a long time, people have said that's all he is. They've questioned his game day, abilities, and obviously a couple years ago, not taking a knee and the whole deal, but people have never accused them of not being able to recruit. Now, all of a sudden, this Jackson Cantwell commitment kind of takes people by surprise. People saying it's only money. I push back on that, and so would Jackson Cantwell. So, guys, if you like what you heard, do me a huge favor. Like and subscribe to the show. Tell all your friends about it. Anybody out there who'd love to get together, collaborate, I'd love to hear from you. Hit me up in the comments. You can find me on Twitter at Hate Football Pod, and on Instagram and YouTube under I Hate Football Podcast. So again, guys, thank you so much for joining me, and I will talk to you guys really soon.